Elio guys, and welcome back to another episode of Infinite Magicraid. And in today's review slash spotlight, we do have Elleena. If you guys missed my previous review of Nid Rolled, who is sitting right beside her, at least in terms of my account at this point in time, feel free to check that out because they are basically partners in crime for my global account here. But just to cover some details with her, we do have her stat distribution right here. I'll pull it up for some more definitive information. Basically, it's very similar to Nid's. However, she does have slightly higher crit damage than him and a hell of a lot low mastery. But that's for a reason. Once again, it's kind of hard testing bleed units at this point in time just because of the quality of my global account, which I mean the game launched like 2 months ago, which makes sense. So in the future, there will definitely be an updated video of this character in particular once I kind of beef out or kind of buff out the things that I want to in terms of bleed. But yeah, that's her stat distribution, and let's quickly cover her skills before I show you guys her emblem. There's also the aura, and of course how she kind of interacts in terms of the whole spotlight aspect of the video. So right here we do have her basic attack. This deals 2 stages of attack damage, very low, and there's also a chance for it to inflict bleed. I do feel like Nid's is a lot stronger than hers, even if it's only 2 stages. Maybe his damage modifiers are just stronger in general. Let me check on this real quick. Yeah, it's the same move, but his damage is just a lot higher because that's 200%. Hers does a measly freaking, 120%. Wow, they did her dirty. Moving on though, we do have her second skill over here called Countering Edge. This works exactly just like Holder, to where she gets the counterattack status up on her for 3 turns, and it also boosts up her effect hit by 50% for 2 turns. So focusing on effect hit for her isn't super necessary because she should be using this move as much as possible, and that's one of the gripes I do have with her AI, so hopefully the developers can change that in the future because this move I feel like just comes on a little bit too late for it to be like extremely useful unless you're using her manually. Then we have her passive over here, which is very similar to Nid's, in which she does get boosted damage from bleed, but what's really interesting about this move is how she resets the duration of bleed on them at the end of any ally's turn, which is super helpful, especially if you're only running 2 units of keeping up bleed stacks on whoever that you're fighting and maximizing their damage. This is one of the reasons why I tend to recommend at least 2 bleed units if you're going to use a bleed unit, just because you want them to kind of play off each other and do a whole bunch of damage. And then it also says meanwhile she grants herself 1 layer of Spirit Blade, and then once she hits X amount of Spirit Blades she would then cast Severing Light, which is just added damage, but until you see it stack up, it doesn't really seem to do much, but it is just basically added damage, which I won't complain about. And then we do have her ultimate right here, which she can proc from her passive, basically spamming the ultimate twice depending on how your turns line up here, where this deals 60% attack damage to all enemies with a 40% chance to inflict 1 layer of bleed for 2 turns, and it also has some built-in leech. My problem once again with this is that yes, it's an AoE move, but in terms of damage, it's just like a joke. Like, this isn't really used for damage, and I understand why it's low because that's also part of her passive here, but I do feel like this move could definitely be tweaked. But those are her skills, you guys, and we can already tell with her kit so far that most of her damage is going to be coming out of that counterattack, and if you're guessing that already, well, congratulations, you're correct. But moving on over here to her emblems, very similar setup to the lovely Nid, however her focus is more so on the crit damage versus the mastery. So I've tested both configurations in terms of mastery versus the critical damage for Elleena. At least in my scenario, in terms of the guild boss, it seems like she performed more damage over time with this crit damage versus the mastery. I'm not saying quote me on it, I'm not saying you can follow what I'm doing right here, but at this point in time that seems to be the route that I want to focus on with her. In the future I'll kind of reset this once again and kind of test things out to see if there's any significant change, but since most of her damage stems from counterattack, I figured kind of building her more like a traditional DPS may benefit her more so in the long run than an actual bleed unit, because counterattack and the effect hit should be sufficient enough to make sure bleed can stay up there, but I always want her to be doing as much damage as possible. But only time will tell if this configuration is the best one. It could definitely not be. I'm not saying you guys have to follow it, but yeah, I would definitely test that in the future to see if that mastery is worth it, especially once her crit rate gets higher and that crit damage is more reliable. I'm curious to see kind of how like in-game bleed would definitely work. And then we also have her aura right here. basic ore, range hit ore. I mean, it boosts up a little bit of her attack rate, defense rate, and HP rate. And, you know, the more enemies up there, the higher effect hit rate that she's going to have. Pairing that up over there with her counterattack secondary skill, things should be definitely sticking, no problem. And that is the lovely Elleena here. I didn't really cover her exclusives, but we can go over here and talk about them real quick. So at level 1, she gains 30% more leech when she has counterattack. That's great for kind of self-sustainment. At level 2, she gains 1 more action turn, and the duration of counterattack is increased by 1 round after casting Countering Edge. That is a very, very big improvement. And then at level 3, no longer limited by layers of bleed, and she inflicts 1 layer of bleed for 2 turns on targets who has no bleed when dealing damage to them. So once again, kind of helps to keep the bleed stacks going, and it especially synergizes with her ability of making sure that the bleed stacks reset and kind of stay on the target. But honestly, any unit at E3 should definitely be performing quite well, so it's honestly not a big shocker here. But let's go ahead and show this lovely baby girl off, you guys. Alright, so we are back with some PvP action to show off the lovely Elleena, and luckily I was blessed on my global account here with Ascendo, so she will have a video in the future. It just takes time to build units, especially at the beginning of a new account here. But anyways, one of the gripes about Elleena is that if you guys have her on auto, you'll see that her skill usage just isn't super duper great. So that's my biggest complaint of using her on auto, where she kind of loses what makes her essentially here. But let me stop talking about that and actually show what I mean. But we do have my lovely boy Nid over here dropping some bleed stacks, nothing too spicy. Let's see if Vidar can get some effect resist on them. So ideally too with Vidar, I would love for him to act first over Nid, because as soon as he can get effect resist down on everyone, I can make sure my 2 bleeders have a higher chance of making sure that their bleeds stick, because that's their entire job. But speaking of Elleena, as I mentioned before here, her main selling point is that counterattack, because it also gives her the effect hit up. However, on auto, she tends to use her ultimate over the counterattack, which is sad, but also makes sense because ultimate should be doing the most damage here. But if she's not with the counterattack buff on her, she loses out on that effect hit buff. So with her AI in particular, I wish the developers would focus on her casting this skill first in terms of her logic, and then her ultimate, and not her ultimate and then this skill, because then we have 2 rounds of where her effect hit is higher than what it should be, but there's no ultimate to really get a big benefit from that. But let's go ahead and get that procced up here. Maya's just here hanging out. We'll get Vidar to go ahead and pop that shield up on us too. Nid is over here making people just absolutely pass away, even though this is Elleena's spotlight, but she did counterattack that holder. And let's proc her ultimate. So extremely lackluster. She did get some bleed stacks on them, but it's really not that much to kind of say, oh, that was worth it. So that in itself wasn't a very good display of Elleena, because Nid is just over here stealing the show, man. Alright, you guys, let's hopefully try this once again with Elleena, because Nid is over here just stealing the freaking spotlight, man. Alright, so we did get some counterattack damage. It obviously wasn't too much, but a little bit. We got a little bit of damage off there on Whim. Nothing too overwhelming, but in a higher DPS situation, I do think that attack would hopefully do a little bit more than what it did. Okay, so we got a little bit more damage out of her. Okay, there goes Whim. Very, very close, but there goes Whim. Nid is just too much, man. But that is the lovely Elleena Spotlight. We can see here that no matter what I do, especially paired up with Nid kind of steals the spotlight in terms of PvP just because his damage is a lot higher and his moves are overall just a lot more flashier. But if you guys seen the Nid video, Elleena behind the scenes can actually out damage him, at least in terms of certain RNG situations. And depending on the content too, especially in other places like the dungeons, she could be a better pick than Nid. But both of them are great units in and of themselves. It's just you have to build them in particular ways, because even though they're both bleed units, they kind of have their own strengths and weaknesses. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, so you guys can check out some more spotlights / character reviews on the way. And if there's a specific review that you guys want to see in a future video, feel free to let me know in the comments below, because even if I don't have that character, I can at least give you guys a review, which is basically an idea of how that character should operate. And then in the future, if I do pull that character and build them, I can also do a spotlight video to kind of follow up on that and see if my past assumptions were correct. But thank you guys once again so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.
Infinite Magicraid. Play to slay.